Hey there, Legal Tea listeners. This is your host, Jenny Roselle. Welcome back for another episode today, episode 143. Today's episode is a current trends topic where we talk about things going on currently that are relevant and pertinent to my estate and elder law world, and or maybe they're things I've seen on the news or stumbled across on social media that are also relevant. On today's episode, we're going to chat about something called elder orphans. And you may be wondering, what the heck is that, Jenny? Well, as soon as I, an elder law attorney, heard that term, I knew exactly what the person meant. It's basically someone that is older or aging that has little or no support system at all. We're going to get into what it really is here in a second, but that's what today's episode is about, my friends. So let's dive in. I found a really great article on the National Library of Medicine's website that I heavily used for researching for this episode. And of course, I have it linked in the source links, so feel free to check it out. The article shared some terms that are commonly associated with elder orphan that are perhaps a bit more relatable or maybe even more well-known. Those are aging alone, patients without surrogates, unbefriended elder, vulnerable elderly, and lone elders. So I think when you think of all of these terms and kind of group them together, you may have a better understanding of what this term elder orphans means. The article specifically defines elder orphans as, quote, aged, community-dwelling individuals who are socially and or physically isolated without an available known family member or designated surrogate or caregiver, end quote. Now, as an estate and elder law attorney, this is a really fascinating topic to dive into because I see this stuff in real life. I see people come into my office and a neighbor drives them to my office or a dear friend drives them because they can't. I also, see not only neighbors, but like I said, friends, but even other professionals to step up and help. I see this all the time. So I not only was, really interested in diving into this topic more than just kind of surface level exposure, but also because this will help spread some awareness of a major issue that is happening and is sort of flying under the radar, to be honest. I'm sure we can all imagine people that even fit this description. And you have to wonder, is anyone stepping in to help them? What if the answer is no? Who is going to step up and keep an eye on them and help them? The National Library of Medicine article, the National Library of Medicine article goes in to provide a couple of case studies. I won't go into both, but the first one is about a 92-year-old female who is widowed and living in her home alone with her special needs son. So it's just her and her special needs son. The son is 65 years old, and he, ironically, is dependent on her. Now, she was able to handle it until recently when she started to realize she herself was slowing down and, in fact, became unable to drive and unable to do everyday household chores. Because of this, she attempted to hire in-home care, but quickly discovered that it was not ideal. She was doing more supervising of them than them helping her and her son. So she cut them and moved on. And about that time, she met a social worker, I think at a hospital setting, but don't quote me on that. Nonetheless, a social worker, and they connected her with an attorney for legal guidance, like making a plan of action for not only her, but also her son if something were to happen to her. So as the case study ends, it says, quote, the likelihood of medical catastrophe for this elder orphan and her son, who will eventually inherit elder orphan status, has decreased significantly, end quote. As I read that story, I thought about how many real life examples of this I've personally seen. So many. And actually just like a week or two ago, I met with a client. It was a mom, and mom and her daughter live permanently together. And the daughter actually quit her career and serves as mom's full-time caregiver. Well, the daughter just recently had hip surgery and has been on a walker for a while. Transparently, I was thinking in the back of my head, how does this work? How does this temporarily, physically handicapped daughter care for her mother? The mom is in a wheelchair and has a type of condition that, without disclosing too many details, makes her essentially totally physically handicapped in more ways than one. That just was about a week or so ago, guys. So I see this stuff in real life all the time. I even see it with parents who are estranged from their kids, or maybe their kid or kids have, crazy enough passed away before them, leaving them as elder orphans. Now on this, one of my favorite lines from this piece from the National Library of Medicine was this, quote, Elder orphans are a unique subset of the aging population, as their inclusion in this category is often due to circumstance rather than choice, end quote. Now, interestingly, this piece was written in 2016. So here we are in 2024, getting really close to 10 years later, and I'm not sure we're any further ahead, which is concerning, right? Their argument is that if we can get more attention on this term elder orphans, that it will create more awareness for everyone, including, and perhaps more importantly, awareness for healthcare workers and healthcare providers that the individual is vulnerable since they may have absolutely no support system, and that providing care and an action plan for the patient needs to be done not only comprehensively, but also multidisciplinary, from kind of multiple avenues we're going to have to use to support this vulnerable person. So that's all a fancy way of saying that basically, hey, this person is going to require a little more time, energy, support, and help, right? So as a way for this episode to possibly be helpful, and not only just bring awareness, but also be helpful too, I wanted to share with you guys that the article does provide a 10-step guide to caring for an elder orphan, and we're going to quickly hit all 10. First, it is important to identify all medical issues. Now, the article states that this may involve speaking with the patient's known providers and other personal contacts, telephoning pharmacies, and accessing old charts, laboratory work, and imaging studies. Second, it's also important to identify cognitive and functional abilities. What this means, guys, is it will be critical to try and get them to do some assessments to see how they are functioning mentally, emotionally, physically, etc. So some of these kind of common assessments are the mini-COG assessment, the geriatric depression scale, also an assessment called activities of daily living. Third, it is also important to obtain detailed social support information. What does that mean? Well, this is, quote, any possible contacts that may be beneficial and may include out-of-town family, friends, neighbors, significant others, etc. Now, this also includes uncovering if they have any long-term care insurance policy, or if they're a veteran or a surviving spouse of a veteran, to explore payment options for healthcare. Fourth, it is critical to create a manageable and realistic treatment plan. The two most important words there are manageable and realistic. Fifth, it is important to investigate and utilize service delivery to their home. So you think home care, bringing in home care to them, pharmacy delivery, food delivery, like Meals on Wheels. Sixth, it is imperative to make safety and injury prevention a priority. Consider having someone visit their house, whether, they're, living in a house, an apartment, a condo, it doesn't matter. But we need to see what can be added, removed, or changed to make their little humble abode a safer place. Now, embedded in this one too is, can the person drive? Can they safely drive? And there are companies that will test to see if the person can safely drive, by the way. Seventh, it is important to address goals of care and advance directives. I, the estate and elder law attorney, fall in this one. This step is to ensure the individual has appropriate documents like a healthcare proxy and a living will to make sure they have the ability to personally share what their wishes are as it relates to medical treatment and end-of-life decisions. And even beyond these healthcare documents, there are things like power of attorney, last will and testament, and maybe trusts that you should at least consider. Just make sure all your T's are crossed and I's are dotted in this regard. 8th, it is critical to understand that there are privacy issues like HIPAA that are involved here. HIPAA is a Health Privacy Act, and it's important to understand that healthcare providers and workers have to follow these privacy laws, all while trying to reach out and provide support. Now, the article says, quote, health professionals must fully document that the purpose of outreach is for the safety and health of the individual, and in doing so, privacy laws are respected. But do no form a barrier to coordination of care, end quote. That's a really interesting point for healthcare workers and healthcare providers to know. 9th, it is important to assess decision-making capacity and involve the elder orphan as much as possible. This reminds me of something I face all the time. Just because someone has dementia does not mean they cannot make decisions, guys. They can. The piece echoes what I just said, and they say, quote, although a person may be failing in some cognitive abilities, it does not necessarily mean that they lack the ability to make certain decisions, end quote. 10th and finally, it is imperative to determine if a guardianship is needed, and if so, to start the process. A guardianship may be needed, maybe it's not, but may be needed in a variety of different circumstances, so it's just something to know and be aware of, especially as it relates to elder orphans. At the end of the day, the why this term, was developed, the elder orphan term, and why we should be talking about it is twofold. First, because it is important for healthcare providers and healthcare workers to know that these individuals are lacking support and lacking caregiving resources, which is critically important when a health event or emergency arises. Secondly, from a sheer quantity perspective, the number of elder orphans is continuing to rise, guys, which make all of these problems bigger and bigger and worse. Add that to the idea of people, generally speaking, living longer. So yeah, the issues that arise specific to elder orphans need to be getting discussed now and planned for now. For the healthcare system and the elder orphans in general, like I said earlier, this piece really inspired this episode. Was from 2016. And here we are nearly 10 years later, and I'm not sure if we've made a ton of progress. Nonetheless, as the article mentions, part of the initiative is really just to get the term out there so that more people in the medical profession and the legal profession, financial profession, etc., know to spot it and know to rally the troops to help. Alrighty, let's wrap this episode up, shall we? Next week, we are back to the celebrity estate planning type of episode. And during those episodes, we dive into a celebrity or big name person that has passed away, and we go into how their estate looked from an estate planning perspective. Next week's episode is about George Carlin's estate. George Carlin, the comedian, actor, etc. Well, I was supposed to do George's episode a few weeks ago, you guys may remember, and I had to make a little bit of a shift, but here we are, back to George Carlin. We'll be doing him next week, I promise. So tune into that next week, Legal Tea listeners, and talk to you then, and stay well.